My name's Jennifer Fuller. I am the news director. I'm also the morning anchor at WSIU Radio. And I'm told I can't be heard in the back of the room, so I'll speak louder because I can. We're really happy to have these distinguished alumni from MCMA here, and I'll take a moment to introduce them just very briefly, and then I'll let them tell you a little bit more about themselves. Pam Bailey is the chief storyteller with NeighborWorks America, that's based in Washington, D.C. Tom Blim is a partner with Group SJR. Marcia Bullard is the retired CEO, editor, and vice president of USA Weekend and chair of America's Charities. Brian Matsumoto is a consumer electronics professional and consultant with Canon USA, and Bob Ramsay is the retired vice president and general manager of WCIU TV. Thank you all so much for coming. And Brian, I'll let you start. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've done since you left SIU.
Sure. I'm a 81 grad of CMP. I've spent the last 15 years working for Canon USA in their professional products group of the camera division. So as a photographer and a person who's been trained or had training and education in photography, I've had one of the world's best jobs, partially because Canon gives me one of everything they make, and I get the opportunity to figure out how it works in most given applications. So I've been very, very fortunate. I'm now kind of semi-retired, and I work for them on a consulting basis. And it was utilizing, Canon would not have hired me if I didn't have a degree in photography. So this was very beneficial going forward. And I feel very fortunate that I'm also, I'm sure you will have lots of friends that will graduate from college and never work in their field of study. So I'm very, very fortunate that I'm still in photography.
Sure, thank you. Pam?
I'm probably an example of all the different things you can do with a journalism degree. I graduated in 1979, and like I'd say most people in journalism, I started off with a newspaper. I worked for the Chicago Tribune when I immediately graduated, but you'll find, very many of you, that the allure of public relations is pretty strong because you can make a lot more money, you can advance quicker. And I'll tell you later on that I caution you to think about that very carefully. But I did do that. I went off and did a public relations career. I ended up as a senior vice president for Johnson & Johnson doing global communications. The value of that, and I will tell you that they really value a journalism degree, however, even more than public relations. And the reason why is because journalism teaches you to write, and write well, especially if you're on the college newspaper, much more so than being in class. A lot of public relations degrees don't do that. I've met a lot of people who have majored only in public relations, didn't have newspaper experience, and they really come out of it not being able to write well. And no matter what kind of job you have in public relations, communications, marketing, whatever you want to call it, being a good writer, a good storyteller is really critical. So I think it provides one of the best foundational degrees no matter what kind of job you end up in. So I did 13 years of communications, public relations, everything from a teaching hospital to a national association to 2 different global corporations. Great advantage in terms of it took me traveling all over the world, made a lot of money. But I also sort of want to pass on the message that you should sort of stay open to dramatic changes, listen to that voice inside that tells you that you're not doing what your values teach you to do, that you, if you want to make a difference, listen to that voice. That's what I did. I ended up dropping out. I'm a corporate refugee, I call myself. I walked away from all that in February 2009. I ended up moving overseas and living in a refugee camp in the Gaza Strip for 3 years. And I can't tell you how powerful, if you have an opportunity, whether it be going to an inner city here and just really immersing yourself in another world that's totally different than your own, do it. Go overseas, do it. I've been to Pakistan, I've been to Yemen now, studying the impact of drones. There's something really humbling, and it will enrich you in ways that nothing else can by immersing yourself in that parallel universe that exists. So I did that, and I'm so happy I did. And so now what I do, I did come back to the States. As you heard, I now, back to my roots. I call it storytelling, and really it's not just writing. I have a sort of a dream job, I would say, working for a nonprofit that specializes in community development and affordable housing, and so I've left the corporate world. I'm now a nonprofit, but I have the time also. I run a youth writing project in Gaza still, teaching them, mentoring them to tell their stories better. My last message, I guess I was telling Daphne this, is that you're going to get a lot of messages saying that security is everything, money is everything, and so don't sacrifice it. Stay with security, stay with a good retirement plan. But if you find that you can embrace ambiguity, you can embrace uncertainty, you also open yourself up to a lot of opportunities. And so that'd be my sort of message to you mainly.
How is it I have to follow the chief storyteller? God, I was just lying awake the other night thinking about my retirement plan. I graduated in 1984, journalism advertising specialization, and quickly went from there to Chicago, where I worked in a handful of agencies, one working on national advertising accounts. I became an account person, so on the management side. Procter & Gamble, Coors, Nestle, and many different national brands. From there, I went to another agency, and then I moved to New York in the late 90s to run a small agency that became a bigger agency called Sawyer Miller, and we were really a corporate reputation and public affairs agency that was focused on national campaigns as well. I got bored of making advertising, and to the point of ambiguity, I kind of embraced, all right, so what's going to be would have been my third act at that point in time. And that was kind of really embracing kind of the digital space and trying to understand what it is that brands needed to communicate within that space. And so today I'm a partner and chief strategy officer in a firm called SJR, which is really probably the largest dedicated content marketing agency in the country. And we focus on telling stories, creating branded content for brands like GE, ExxonMobil, Credit Suisse, Avon, Home Depot, Target, and many others. And it's really about trying to understand, and Daphne and I have talked a lot about this, how to apply the knowledge that you get here, but know that the space, the market space you're going into is changing rapidly, and in fact changing almost every day. And so how do you apply those skills to creating media, multimedia, that is going to be both relevant to the audiences that you're speaking to, and also to them, something that they, of course, want to share and populate their own ecosystems with. So thanks for having me, and looking forward to your questions.
I'm Marcia Bullard, and I graduated in 1974, so I'm earlier than all of you. I don't know about Bob.
79.
See? Oh, wow. All right, so I'm the senior member of this panel, and I feel like it's kind of to tell the truth, but I think I had the greatest job in the world. Like Brian said, he thought he had the greatest job in the world. I graduated in 74. I went to work for the Rochester, New York Democrat and Chronicle. And I'm impressed that you got a job right out of school at the Chicago Tribune. That's a huge,
Interned.
amazing though.
The internship, yeah, I
It's
know.
a big paper to go to right off the bat. And Rochester was, a circulation of over 100,000, so it was a good-sized paper, but not as big as the Tribune. And I was there, for 8 years, starting on the police beat and night cops, and eventually doing county government, which I hated, and criminal courts, which I loved, and eventually became the editor of the Sunday newspaper magazine there. And then I benefited from being in the right place at the right time, and in 1982, that paper was owned by Gannett, and Gannett decided to start a little project called USA Today, and brought in reporters and editors from its papers around the country to help work on that. So I went down to Washington, D.C. in 1982 to work on the prototypes of USA Today, and then stayed on for the startup and worked at USA Today for its first 3 years, and then Gannett bought a magazine, and I became the editor of that and relaunched that, and then eventually became the president and CEO of that magazine called USA Weekend, which was a Sunday newspaper magazine, now out of business. So not only am I retired now, but I'm retired from a publication that doesn't even exist, which is weird, but during my But I have to say that, it was, so I stayed in journalism my whole career, although I went kind of from the editorial side after many years to sort of the business side as president and CEO, and oversaw all the departments, advertising, circulation, as well as editorial and production. And I think in terms of the staying with your passion and the storytelling, the great training that you get in journalism is that you do learn to tell stories and you can write well. And that's the joy of journalism. It is being able to tell the stories of people who live in worlds different from our own, and to help understand those stories and reflect them back to other people. I think it's a really high calling. I urge you to think hard about, using your talents in that way. And also, there are lots of opportunities that are going to present themselves to you in your career. Sometimes the job you're in may not seem like a real exciting job at the moment, but then something comes along, like the opportunity to start a new newspaper or a new venture. And, if you're up for it and willing to work hard, amazing things can happen. So I'm pleased to be here too. Bob?
Thank you. I have to somewhat clarify the 1979 thing, because I finished my coursework in December of 1979, but there wasn't a mid-year graduation here, so on the books, I'm a 1980 grad, but it's really 79. I spent about 35 years in the broadcasting business, 12 jobs in 11 different cities. So I saw America through somebody else's relocation budget. And I mean, the experience that I got at SIU was incredible, especially the hands-on experience. I was able to graduate with a resume tape. We used to have resume tapes back then, nothing online. And, so we had two job opportunities available, actually 3 available to me the last day of my classes. I started out on the news and sports side, and then kind of through a quirk of the industry changed into the management track, focusing first on programming and then on general management. I spent 17 years with the Tribune Company, which is now 2 companies based in Chicago. Well, actually not much anymore, but and the last part of my time with Tribune, I was a station manager at WGN TV and the WGN Superstation at the time. And then I ran their stations in San Diego and Sacramento. I left Tribune and joined a family-owned business in Chicago called Weigel Broadcasting. We have local stations in Chicago, South Bend, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And towards the end of my time there, the last few years, I was the executive vice president in charge of the broadcasting division, but I was also operations vice president for the company. We got into a niche business a number of years ago when you could do more things with your spectrum than one channel. And we have created 4 national digital networks that are available in every market for stations to put on their .2s, their .3s, and whatever. One is called MeTV, which is the biggest of those digital networks. It's in about 92% of the country. We did one for the Fox local stations. They're still doing it, called Movies. Started one a year ago for the CBS stations called Decades, which is a really cool thing, which takes the CBS News library and we do a program each day from the CBS News library about something, things that happened that day, and then match it with programming relevant to that show. So that was kind of fun. And then there's another one called Heroes and Icons. But it's proven to be a really good niche industry for our company. I now serve as a consultant for Weigel Broadcasting, which means that I take phone calls and answer any emails that
that they feel are necessary. It is, broadcasting, when Joey and I and Jim got into it then, and what it is today, is, incredibly different. It changes every day. I think the term broadcasting probably needs to go away. We're content providers, and the content available through the television medium or the video medium has never been stronger. It's incredible, the revolution that you see. And, when I started in this business, it was transmitters and then cable, and now the way content is delivered, over the air, streaming, cable, whatever, it changes. It's been mentioned before. It's a revolution, and if you're afraid of change, it's kind of scary. And if you embrace change, it is unbelievably exciting what's happening. You're going to see, with the Spectrum auction coming up, you're going to see some television stations going away. You're going to see some people combining. We're going through a second major, in the broadcasting side, technology change. The last one was about 7 years ago, and we're going through it all again. That part is scary, but yet it's really exciting. If you're a content creator, and everybody in this college touches content one way or another, it's exciting no matter how it's being delivered, because the world is open to creativity, whereas in the past there weren't the outlets. There are, no one has come to the end page of the internet. So there is just an amazing revolution going on. But industries that stay as they were are what we used to call matured, which means on the backside of the hill. But industries that embrace change, it's just, I can't wait to see what's happening next year. Can't wait to see what's happening in 5 years. And I can't wait to see what's happening when you guys are all sitting here in 35 years. Because it's mind-boggling and very exciting.
You each in some way mentioned adaptability or change, or the ways that things have changed in your career. And I know a lot of students kind of look at that and say, how do I make myself marketable and adaptable? What recommendations do you have for students as they're just beginning their career to be prepared for that change and be able to make the leaps that you've had to make?
Well, I started my career in the days of film. Of course, my degree was in the days of film. And I essentially started at Canon just as the digital revolution was starting. And so it's been a real interesting journey in terms of adaptability. Not to mention not only on the still side, but on the video/cinema side as well. And today things are radically, if you would have told me in 2000 that we would be at this point today, I would have said no way. But it's being able to roll with the punches. It's realizing very quickly early in your college careers that one of the constants in life is going to be change and adaptability. If you're on the still side, I would say my advice to you would be get some video experience. If you're on the video side, I would say get some still experience. If you're on the writing side, if you're in the journalism side, you will also need still and video experience. Because today, every person working in those fields is essentially a one-person band. They have the reporter shooting video and stills. They have the photographer shooting video as well. They have a video crew also shooting stills. Not to mention they have to do some writing. So it's one of those that you really need to be as well-rounded as you possibly can be going forward. And without a doubt, yes, the technology will continue to change going forward, so that perhaps the equipment that you use today may be totally obsolete by the time you graduate. Versus the days of film, the cameras, movie cameras, they were around for forever. Today, that's not the case. So it's just, again, being flexible and adaptable to the change.
I would build on Brian's thoughts. I mean, you got to make stuff. I mean, you guys already do for coursework. You already do because you have your own social media accounts. You're posting Instagram. You're using other platforms, Snapchat. But I mean, you have to do it less about kind of cataloging your social life and as much about kind of what's your point of view, and really start to articulate that point of view through the media, the multimedia that you're already creating. Because to Brian's point, you will not just be writing. If you are just writing, so we segregate. We actually have multimedia teams and we have editorial teams. But that editor needs to really understand how to edit. They need to have actually an eye, an acute eye for kind of visual and dramatic storytelling in that fashion. So unfortunately today, it's harder. And you got to just keep making stuff and experimenting, because I think that's what you're going to bring into the professional world is your own kind of studied way and eye and a way to articulate that kind of creative point of view.
And I think you have to continue to be curious and learning new stuff, kind of what Tom is talking about in another way of just keeping your eyes and ears peeled and understanding what's new out there, because technology is changing so fast. When you get hired, you're going to be brought in because you know all the stuff that the folks who are hiring you don't know, right? So you're going to be the experts for a little while in the social media and the digital stuff that you guys are bringing to it that they're going to hire you for. But in order to stay relevant, you're going to have to continue to keep your radar up and and keep learning about all the new stuff that's coming along. And that's where you've got a lot of facility and connectedness that I think will be a really good advantage for you. So as you see things developing now, that same way it's going to just keep expanding, and you know how quickly things happen and come up. And I think staying in tune with that and kind of helping to be the first eyes and ears out there for the folks you're working for in learning and identifying new technologies that could be helpful to getting to their business is going to be a huge advantage for you.
Well, and I would add about some things that worry me a little bit. I mean, this is not so much, this is more challenges to you all. The things that maybe your employers are not going to care about. But I don't know how many of you came into journalism with ideals. I mean, I know when I came into journalism, it was with Woodward and Bernstein, and I really did think of journalism as the conscience of the world. I don't know if too many people do that anymore. I mean, journalism has become much more of a business. So, but for those of you who came into journalism or communications because you really thought you were going to contribute, this is my challenge to you. Because listen, I spent a lot of time in the corporate world, and they're not going to care about a lot of this. So you're going to have to really know in your own heart where you draw the line, for instance. If you end up going in public relations, you'll be asked to lie. Really, I'm serious. You have to have a very, very good, strong sense internally of what your values are and where you draw the line, who you will work for, who you won't work for, and even if you're working for a good place, what you will and won't do. And I guarantee you, once you're getting an income, that will become very blurry. People become very, very good at rationalizing to themselves, and pretty soon something that you might have thought was wrong before, you convince yourself it's actually okay. So it really, really will take some very careful thought. If for those of you, and actually even if you stay in journalism has become a business. And one of the things that I am personally shocked at is just the use of wording. After being overseas, living in a conflict zone like I have, seeing what the truth is on the ground, and then I read AP, and then I read the news. And it's not like they're outright lying, they're not. But it's use of words that are loaded and create impressions that then shape everybody's point of view because they don't have the time to become informed like I have been. So you really, really have to be careful about really aware of the words that you're using. And actually technology, and there's some pressure within the media industry to, it may be more subtle, but there's some pressure to use certain words or not use certain words. But I think that's where your own sense of ethics are really, really important. Technology also is a double-edged sword. People are left behind by technology. I have a sister who's a social worker in rural Illinois, and she's constantly reminding me that the clients she works with are not on Facebook, they're not on Twitter, they're not doing all this stuff. And what about them? So I think, and I actually sometimes I think we're moving into a phase now with social media where it's a fire hose. You know, there's so much stuff, the chance of you being seen in the newsfeed anyway is pretty small. I worry that we have an over-reliance on technology. I worry that the people who aren't using those newfangled things that are out, that we all fall in love with, that we're losing them, that we're not paying attention to them. And we have to be thinking about how do we communicate with them too. I worry that there's such cut budgets that very few people are doing the investigation that we really need. You know, the kinds of reporting that they used to do, you know, when you go out and you actually spend months researching and getting to actually know the people you're writing about. There's a lot of pressure in journalism to just focus on the easy sources, you know, rely on government figures. And again, that's something that I know firsthand now that maybe they don't lie, but they sure as heck do admit a lot of the truth. You know, so that's, for those of you who stay in journalism, I hope you're on deadline. It's really easy to rely on the easy source who will give you a fast answer. Somebody who's not controversial, you know, or maybe you want that, or you want controversy and you ignore the grays. I actually had an editor when I first started who would ask me where the villain was, and I tried to talk about where the gray, you know, and so, you know, that's where you are going to have a really strong internal sense of what's right and what's wrong for you. And you may have to make a choice, for instance, between making a lot of money for the big corporate entities and maybe working for the small indie. That's, to me, what's exciting. What I find really exciting about the media is the proliferation of more citizen-driven media that scares the big entities to death. And yes, there's a lot of risk with it because you miss some of the investigation. You don't know what's true or not. But and now governments, I see that in the Middle East, governments are using social media very repressively. They've learned the techniques, so it's turned against the people. But I think the proliferation, the more that you can try to incorporate the sources that never get quoted, the poor people, whatever, you know, the ones who are usually totally left out of the picture. That's my challenge to you, is make sure that they're part of the story.
I love that because you know, most of the people who were here when I was here, we got into this business because of that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We wanted to make sure that, you know, we could talk truth to power. We wanted to hold people accountable. It was a calling. And, you know, that changed. You know, back in those days in broadcasting, one company could only own, I believe it was five at that time. Then went to 7 stations, 7 radio and 7 TV. Well, now you can own basically up to 39 whatever %, but you can get past that. So the industry became corporatized, and then you had the issue with, you know, not being able to do that. So the keeping that passion and, you know, in the business is so, I think, vitally important. I mean, I think we've been hurt as a nation because some voices have been silent, and we've been able to go and, you know, we go to the mayor, we go to, you know, there are go-to people instead of being able to have the time to you know, get to other people in the story. And, you know, and then we've also become in I think, corporate media, one of the, to me, you know, faculty don't throw things at me. One of the biggest fallacies of journalism is there are 2 sides to every story. That's false. It's not true. Sometimes there aren't. Sometimes there are more sides. Embracing the gray, that's a key issue, and you have the ability to kind of enter the business and hold the business accountable because the corporate entities are I'm speaking as a broadcaster or as a television person, the corporate entities are kind of losing some of their grip on things. Now, on the positive side, because I am a glass half full person. Most of you, and I'm, again, speaking as a TV guy, most of you have been creating content recreationally for years. When we came here, we had a passion to learn a business, but we also had to learn the blocking and tackling. You know, this is a football. You folks have been creating content recreationally for years, so you come with a passion of creating content. And that puts you way ahead of where people were in the past. Now, here you'll learn skills to help you hone the creation of that content, but you're a little step ahead of people in this industry, you know, from 10 years ago. That's a really, really great advantage to you. And again, it was mentioned before, your embrace of technology is ahead of the people you're going to work for initially. That's an advantage to you. So those things, I think are really, you know, something that you should, you know, be encouraged by. And I almost, if not every person on the panel, I think every person on the panel has mentioned this. Writing, please pay attention to writing. Please pay attention on how you can properly communicate with people. Even if your audience is 2 people or 200 or 2,000, writing is the most important skill I believe a content creator will have, or in my position as a manager. If we can't write, you know, if I send out a memo, or if I sent out a memo to the staff that had writing errors in it, they'll focus on that. And it will hurt my credibility as someone trying to deliver a message. So please, you know, when you hear that we have to do this writing and this writing, you know, it's right. It's important, and it's maybe the biggest skill you'll need to take out of here.
I have plenty of questions, but this day isn't about me, so I'll open up the floor to any questions from students or faculty. Sure.
It's nice to put a face on waiting to the sound of your voice for many years.
Thank you.
I should add, I was a teaching assistant during the time when 3 of you were here. And I was a teaching assistant for Harry Stonecipher's 310 writing course. And I assure everyone here, these were normal people. These were normal people. They are not who they are now. All of this is possible to you guys, so listen to these folks. They have a lot to say, a lot to communicate, and they learned something from the writing class, I can assure you.
So can I ask you, we've got so many people here who are faculty and staff. How many of you are graduates of our college? Raise your hand so the students will see it. Look at this. Look how many, look how many of the people who are teaching you today and are working here today are actually graduates who were students just like you just a few years ago. It's exciting.
Thank you.
What else? Shirley, you have, yeah.
In what ways, this is a question for everyone, in what ways do you believe the internet has helped or hurt your respective businesses?
Tammy, did you plant that question?
That's a great question.
I wish I was that smart.
That's a good question. No, I would say, I mean, it's not even a hurt or help. It's reality. It's you know, all the business is done online now, and obviously, you know, 50% of all content is consumed on mobile. So it's just, you know, I mean, I think everybody touched upon it. It was either adapt or die. And so it just has become an absolute necessity to not only use it, but to actually excel at innovative ways to communicate through the web.
And I think clearly for print, you know, for the newspaper business, it was a huge disruptor because people had access to information without having to pay to buy a newspaper to get it. And so even more than TV maybe, because TV kind of seems like it freely comes into your living room. but newspapers you actually had to go out and buy. So that financial change really affected the newspaper industry dramatically. But on the other hand, it's been a huge benefit to the newspaper industry because we have this way of distributing and collecting information that we never had before. And it's so rich and so vast that it's and so superior in many ways. It's just trying to find a way that you can be the content creator and provider and have that product valued in a way that someone's willing to pay for it or finance it, and that's still the challenge that hasn't been, the puzzle piece that hasn't been quite solved.
Where it's affected television, local television, is the way you schedule. You know, there are very few people in this room who access video content on a linear scheduled basis. And broadcasting television is tied into Monday through Friday, this is on at this time, and so on and so forth, which has forced the industry, and sadly, at the beginning, reluctantly, to make sure that the content is available in many other ways instead of, you know, over a transmitter or through a cable line, because people binge watch, people, you know, delay view, and that's taken where the business was brought kicking and screaming. They were like, oh, no, we have to make sure that they're watching Wheel of Fortune at 6:30. Well, no, people are not, well, Wheel of Fortune's a bad example, but, you know, some of the primetime shows and things like that, it's forced the industry into the current century. And I don't think as television have learned from, you know, newspapers were the canary in the coal mine. And, you know, then there's, you know, radio where, you know, they have their challenges as far as the content is and how it's delivered. So that's where it's really changed us. It's forced us, with the exception of live programming like news and sports, which is why you see a lot of local television stations adding news and sports if they can. It's forced us to adapt to the way people take in content.
I'm just going to give a two-part answer because I've worked in very different businesses, so it's sort of different answers. But overall, I think the internet's extremely positive. But it's funny because in the public relations world, I still remember when I was working at Johnson & Johnson, and you know, at first the internet was a sort of huge advantage because another way to advertise our message. But I remember when they were first setting up consumer websites, and they didn't want to put any kind of contact function. So the people, they still was treating it like a one-way medium, you know. And I kept trying to tell them, no. The beauty of the internet, the reason why people like the internet is because it's democratic. You know, you have, if you're going to be out there putting your message there, you have to allow a method for the people to respond to you. But they were terrified of it because that meant that they would be getting perhaps complaints about their drugs, you know, and we didn't really want to know because, well, then you have to report it, you know, and, you know, so it was real painful challenge at first because, you know, how do you handle a two-way flow of communication? I think now, of course, they're starting to manage that. I think what's sort of a shame is when if you remember the internet, when the internet first started, the beauty of it was more like a conversation. It was real people talking to each other. And now, of course, as companies become much more adept at it, you know, it turns more into this same smooth, managed communications that you see in TV commercials, et cetera. So I think the real challenge is how do you maintain, how do the people and the users maintain that honest communications. There's always ways to go around the corporations, though. I'm like for J&J, for instance, there's what we say, and it's our carefully crafted messages, but you can also find a forum of people who use the drugs talking about it, whether we like it or not. And that's sort of the beauty of it. There's just sort of checks and balances. So it's definitely posed a real challenge to companies and how to deal with that. And I'm actually pleased that because it's a democratic, I think it's really important that we maintain a democratic platform. You've seen some of the debates that have happened with the FTC about whether or not people get faster signals, for instance, you know, faster loading times if they pay a certain amount. I think we have to fight that. We have to really keep the internet on an equal playing ground for everybody. And if we do that, then it'll continue to be sort of a checks and balances for everybody. I will say for my other life, my life post-corporate America, you know, it's this huge benefit on the one hand that, you know, the people that I work with who work in very disadvantaged parts of the world, they're now connected, which they weren't. They were extremely isolated before. But what's scary is that the governments now have learned how to use it too. So I actually have just edited a report for a human rights organization overseas where we've documented how the governments are now monitoring who's posting on Facebook and what they say on Twitter. And you've got bloggers who are now being called in for interrogations and tortured as a result of it. And so that's sort of the next challenge. How do we handle that? So it's sort of a double-edged sword there too.
In addition, I was going to say the biggest thing for the internet, if you're a manufacturer, obviously, in the beginning, everybody was afraid of it. Everybody didn't quite know how to react to it corporately, in terms of like Canon, Nikon, Sony. However, you know, it very quickly became another avenue for spreading your message. And then, of course, it also blossomed an entire new field of bloggers on the technology side. Well, I shouldn't say just necessarily the technology side, any front. But there are literally people that make a living blogging, regardless of the topic. And it's, again, part of that for people who have a story to tell. It's been a huge boom because it gives that creator another avenue to get their message out or to get their story out. So it's been an interesting road the last 15 years. The other really incredible thing is that with the internet, most of the companies out there have a channel on YouTube. And then on top of that, you have people making all kinds of videos about how to do something because they had to go and figure it out. And that's also now showing up, whether it be on YouTube or just Facebook. And so it's that evolution of communication has been a real interesting thing to witness. And of course, a lot of it is you can't control. You can't necessarily make sure that your message, if you're the Canon, Nikon, Sony, if that the message is correct. You know what? And a lot of it is you're going to have to go with the flow. So.
It's just like the first day of class. We do have seats in the front. If you guys that just came in want to find a spot, we do have some seats available. What other questions are out there? Surely you're curious. Yes?
Sure. Yeah, I'm wondering, you are about to hire a junior assistant, fresh out of university. What are you looking for? Like, it's not just the CV. Do you need their website that has like examples of things, or what would you want to see before you even like call them in? I mean,
Kathy,
what do you think? Yeah.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, my name's Kathy Frith, and I teach in the School of Journalism in the advertising area. And so I'm wondering, how do they market themselves and package themselves now so that they can get your attention? Because it's a competitive world out there. And any thoughts you have on that would be, I think, helpful to them.
I think, Kathy, definitely on the creative side, I mean, you need to have, it was always your book. You need to have probably produced work. That doesn't have to be, professionally produced, but again, I think demonstrates your creative sensibility. I think a lot. There's there's a lot of you probably keep blogs or you're pinning, you're snapping, you're posting Instagram. All of that's discoverable. So don't forget that depending upon what you're putting up there, we're going to look at it. So you want to keep it clean. And we'll get a sense for that. I think, unless you're really specializing, so unless you're a designer or unless you're a multimedia artist or a photographer, if you come out with just a specialization in advertising, for instance, it's a passion for the business, it's an enthusiasm for it. it's a knowledge that, that you have, that you not only bring out of the classroom, but that you bring kind of, from your heart and mind into that interview. That's, you're gonna, what you've learned here, it gets you started, gets you through the door, but then it all goes away, because you'll relearn things or you'll learn new things that'll be incredibly important to your career. So it's really, for me, it's that enthusiasm, it's that desire to kind of, run through walls, get anything done, self-starter, and just bring that energy into an interview,
I do think samples, just to add on, I do think, I'm not for advertising, but if you're applying, say, for a public relations job or, not for reporting, but say public relations where, and writing is involved, no matter what, then I absolutely look for samples of writing. I think personally, cover letters are more important than the resume to me, because I know some people ignore them altogether. But to me, cover letters is where you really sort of separate yourself. It's how you express yourself in narrative form. And it's been sort of probably maybe not as edited as some of the other stuff that may be published out there. And then also signs for that you've taken some initiative. So I'd say if you're still in university, I'll favor somebody who has actually done more than just coursework than for somebody who just got great grades in class. So here, for instance, I would say still with public relations, work on the newspaper is golden, that you've taken some initiative, you've gotten involved beyond your coursework, and then you've got so even if you weren't in the newspaper, that you're blogging, that you're out there showing that you have sort of some internal drive to do it.
I absolutely agree. A cover letter is really critical, and you should think about what you're going to say in an interview. Practice with a friend or something like that. Even on the telephone, because a lot of interviews might get done on the phone. Or even if you're going to be exchanging emails, make sure that you're doing it in really proper English and that you're, not screwing up anything, because things like that will just toss you out in a second. So don't let yourself get sloppy. And samples of your work, and I think, people who've done other things besides just go to class, clubs, activities, jobs. I don't care if you work at the state fair selling popcorn, something that shows that you're industrious and you're going to be somebody who's going to contribute. All those really help. So, you have a question?
Just for Tom. I noticed that when Kathy asked you the question, you kind of went over creative. What about for account management or someone in accounts who was like me, who aspires to be in accounts like you were, especially corporate?
I think, the point of doing more outside of your classwork, I really got my first job in account work because I ran what was called then SAA, which was the Student Advertising Agency here. And that was on my resume, and that's what we talked about in my interview. And so, it was that initiative, it was that demonstration of my kind of passion for wanting to be in that business, because I decided that I wanted to have that business while I was in school as well. I must say that it took its toll on my classwork, but I had very forgiving instructors at the time. It really, I think that's very much a critical fact, especially for someone who wants to go into the management side, that you already demonstrate those leadership skills. That if AAF is, if the student competition is still, alive and well here, that you're on the presentation team, that you're leading the presentation team. I did that 2-3 years in a row. So it's those things, I think, demonstration of leadership, very much, is important.
Even for corporate, does that require a master's, or does that, a lot of experience along with a bachelor's, get you in a little bit?
When I got into the business, Northwestern had just started up their master's in advertising. It was a 1-year kind of get a job degree, like spend probably then like $25,000 and get a job in advertising. And so, I was one of the few bachelor's degree students. I was up at then, there were lots of masters or MBAs. I believe, sure it could be very helpful in opening doors. I actually think probably an MBA would be probably better. But it isn't anything that I demand of anyone. If you're smart, and enthusiastic and hungry coming right out of an undergrad program, that's fine with me.
And I think, a lot of times an MBA might be a little more valuable down the line, even though that's a big suck on your time and it's really hard to pull off. But after you've been doing something for a couple, 3 years, you get a much better idea of how you might want to go forward and what information might be most valuable to you. And so, I think about, maybe waiting and trying some things first if you can get a job, and then maybe taking that step to make that investment of an MBA or a master's down the line a little.
And I'm sure one of the other huge things that a lot of corporations are going to look at, well, Canon in particular, is your experience. People who have volunteered to do either still or video work, regardless of exactly where they were in that particular team, if they're exhibiting the fact that they can work on a team, is absolutely huge. Because obviously in any corporation, you're going to be working with other people. There are very few lone sharks out there. So that becomes a big thing that employers will look at. And you got to be really careful what you put on the internet. Because like they say, it lives forever. And we have had people that have had a terrific looking resume till you look at what they've said on the internet, and at that point, a lot of companies won't touch them. So that's just one of those things that obviously it's fine to be absolutely passionate, but, it kind of depends on what you're passionate about. So just be careful.
And one thing, keep in mind that besides your mother, possibly, no one should care more about your career and your future than you.
Yeah.
And so you're in the marketing business, no matter what your skill is going forward. You're in the marketing business, you're marketing yourself. And so every one of you should have a plan on how you differentiate yourself, how you're different from somebody else, because the competition for jobs is fierce. So you got to stand out. And when you develop that marketing plan, if you're doing it the second semester of your senior year, you're sunk. Okay, this is something you should be thinking about, in your sophomore year, at least by the beginning of your junior year. You have to have your marketing plan. What do I need to do to differentiate myself? Whether it's you've heard different skills and different things that employers are looking for. But if you're going to come with a resume, you may, have a 4.0 for 8 semesters and be the best student possible. But if you haven't done work outside, or if you haven't volunteered, or if you haven't shown initiative outside the classroom, you're not going to differentiate yourself. So think about that early, and your marketing plan for yourself may change, but at least get it started and keep asking questions.
I just want to add one little thing about this bit about, I heard, I've sort of reinvented myself when I returned to the States, and I heard also a lot of advice not to do any of my advocacy online because people would look at that. And so I really had a choice to make. And I guess my personal opinion, I made the choice to stick with my values and to continue the work that I thought was important. But the distinction, I think, is that if you go into public relations, nonprofit work, whatever, they're professionals. They will look, they're looking for people who can advocate for causes. That's what, if you want to go in the nonprofit space, which I hope some of you will, it's very, very important work for this country. They're looking for people who know how to advocate and to be persuasive about an issue. And you can't do that if you're going to play it safe all the time. But the key what they're looking for, I think, is that you do it, that you're presenting yourself professionally, that you're not using unprofessional tactics in terms of the tactics you use to go after people. You're not making slurs, et cetera. You're not going after personal attacks. I hope you don't interpret. I think it's easy to. People, it's been a lot of scare stories about, that I'm afraid people would take to the extreme and say, well, then I'm not going to get involved with causes, because let's face it, just about every cause out there that's really important, there's going to be somebody in this political environment who's against it. You could get hired by a Republican who doesn't believe in climate change, for heaven's sakes. And certainly in the areas I get involved with, there are people who disagree with that. So, I mean, it is one of those things where so to me, it's not so much avoiding causes that might be controversial, it's just be professional about it. And I think that anybody who's a professional also will see that you were effective at putting forth your cause. The other thing too, I think, is you have to remember we have rights. I've heard of employers who have actually asked for ridiculous things like Facebook passwords and that kind of thing. And I would absolutely say no to that. I've heard, I don't know if you've heard stories about that. I have. Yeah. And I mean, that's ridiculous. I have some self-respect and don't do that. Or people who, companies that want to do extreme background checks before you've even interviewed. You know, that's ridiculous. I hope I think the other thing I would really stress is internships to the extent that, I mean, to me, that's probably the number one thing. If you can get an internship when you're at university, not only can that often turn into a job, I mean, that's how actually believe it or not, that's how I got my job at the Tribune, is that I happened to live in Chicago, and I got the internship by just bugging the heck out of them. I call it every single day. And you know, you have to be very persistent. But internships can not only give you really great connections, it may be your first job, but that's a really, really, I mean, I don't know about you guys, if you see that on their resume, then you know you've been in a work environment. So try to get that like your junior year if you can.
Jackie, I know you mentioned if you were inspired, you'd speak up. Anything that you've heard so far that you wanted to add on to?
I think I would just really re-emphasize everyone's point, the panel's point about good writing, because I've both been on the side of trying to get hired on the basis of my writing, and I've also been on the side of hiring people. And when I run communications operations, it is invaluable to me to have people who can write, and I find that it's even people with journalism degrees, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can write. The other thing, we were talking about the internet, I think it's had a very positive effect overall, and one of the best examples that I've come across is Black Lives Matter and the kind of understanding we have now of institutional racism in police departments. I've talked with friends who've been in the business for a long time who wrote stories about police brutality and police racism over the years, over and over again. Marcia is probably, maybe edited some of those series and never really made the kind of impact that the videos that have surfaced in Ferguson and elsewhere have made over the internet and with a response to those videos on the internet. So it is that kind of civic journalism, I think, that is a direction that the internet has opened up for us and is nothing but positive.
Jackie, can you share with the group your own personal story?
Sure.
Graduated here.
I left SIU and went to work for newspapers. One of my first jobs was at the Daily Herald in Chicago, and I know a lot of kids are from Chicago. And I eventually ended up, I moved on to a newspaper in Texas. I started that progression of moving to ever larger and larger circulation newspapers, and eventually ended up in the Washington Bureau of Knight Ridder newspapers, now McClatchy, and did a lot of different kinds of writing and editing over the years, and finally got to the point where I had done it all. Loved doing it. It was a great career in journalism, and highly recommend it to all of you. There's a lot of reward, a lot of very satisfying moments in my career. I moved over a couple of years ago to the other side, to the public relations side, and I've done work now for, worked for the Obama administration for a couple of years, And I have found that that is equally rewarding. I've got, what I have discovered is the skill set that I first laid the foundation for at SIU and then built over the years is just as valuable on the other side of communications as it was on the journalism side. And so I've been able to make that transition. And I think one of the other points the panel made was the ability to be flexible, not only flexible, but skilled in multi-platforms. In the shops that I've run on the other side, we've incorporated, writing and video and photography and digital presentation, infographics, and I need people who understand all of those things and know how they are interrelated. So the more adept you can get at multiple platforms, or at least, as somebody made the point, understanding how various projects can bring all the platforms together into one very effective communications project is very important these days. So yeah, that's my story. So now I am the Public Information Officer for the U.S. court system based in Washington, D.C.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to turn the tables a little bit on some of the faculty that are in the room, and hopefully I won't be chased out of the building later. What are you seeing from graduates, those of you particularly that have been in hiring positions? What are students lacking? What are you hoping that's being taught in the classroom that they're not getting?
Good command of the language. I have run into that a lot the last several years on resumes. I've always been, it's funny, I always use the excuse that I went to a Chicago public school in terms of my use of the grammar and spelling, but to look at people sending out a resume, because this is the piece that's representing them, and there's all kinds of errors. And today, with a word processor, a lot of that can get corrected if they're paying attention. And so I'm kind of appalled at that. I don't know if it's just a shortcoming or the fact that everybody's texting or what the deal is, but that's one of the things I've run across a lot the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, I'm still appalled at how many people are not good writers, and I think that comes from a lot of practice. The good thing about working on the university newspaper is that you're doing a lot of writing on the fly, constantly, and then being edited by good people. I mean, one of the worst things to do is, I think, unfortunately, in public relations, is you can go out into jobs and get edited by people who are not good. So the great thing about, I think, being in a newspaper, starting there at least, is that you're being edited by really good writers. But the other thing is really critical thinking. That's the other thing that happens, I see a lot in new people in public relations, is that they're so focused on pleasing their manager or whatever, they don't question. Sometimes I'll see them get some material, there'll be some material in a news release or something, and I'll ask them what that means, and they can't explain it to me completely, and it's, well, because I got it from, well, this is what was in the marketing brochure that was already approved. And I expect, even though you're young, I know it's hard when you're young, you're new at a job, but critical thinking is really important. And if you're a journalist, it's absolutely important to question what you're hearing. But I think in public relations, to me, the ideal, if you're really going to serve your company, and maybe they don't want this, but this is what you should be doing, is serving as that person who's going to, because nobody else will do it, is thinking to yourself, how will other audiences perhaps view this? How will a reporter think about this? Or how will maybe our critics out there think about this? Very often, everybody else in the company is going to be drinking the Kool-Aid. The marketing people for sure. So I think public relations done well is when you are the one that does that. You're able to put yourself outside of the company. I know you work for the group. You think it's wonderful. They're paying your paycheck. It's great. Somebody needs to be able to think outside and look in and say, this is how somebody else might see it. And let's make sure we're prepared. Let's make sure, I still remember a time when I was at J&J, And J&J owned a company called Landmark. I'm blanking it, LifeScan. They made blood glucose monitors. And the FDA had shown up with 62 federal agents that morning and cleaned out all their files. And what J&J management heard was from the LifeScan management was, oh, just a disgruntled employee apparently had reported, a problem with one of their devices. Just there's nothing to it. I remember thinking to myself, how do you know? And they bought it. But how do you know? How do you know they're telling you the truth? And it turned out they weren't. There was actually one of the employees had become a whistleblower and turned into the FDA. So to me, if you really want to serve a company and feel good about yourself, you need to be thinking critically always, and that's not something that I think people get from school all the time.
I totally agree with that. And it is hard to really get that here. I think it does come with work and kind of absorbing kind of the means to kind of create strategy for your clients or your company or whomever it might be. And also, I mean, I see a lot of good kids, and I'm not gonna, generationally, you might get a knock a bit, like, this is the slacker generation. They don't come with enough energy into, the job marketplace. That's not true, so, if you hear any of that BS, it's not true. All of those skills are important, and just, you gotta want it, that sense of differentiating yourself is dead on as well. Things that you just can't, you can learn here as you kind of do more things. I kind of treated SIU a bit like a vocational school. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, so I got as much experience. I got the internship at the Southern Illinois in writing copy. I ran the student agency. I led, AAF. And so, I was doggedly focused, so it was easier for me. But I think depending upon what you want to do when you get out of here, if you want that kind of job, you gotta really want it and do everything you can to get it.
I agree with you.
Yeah, so I would say that what I would see is a lack is to not, it plays into all of this, which is to not just accept the one source for a story or a one point of view. You find the gray, because nothing is ever just black and white. And really every story that you report, edit, should have 2 or 3 or more sources. And I see that a lot in beginning reporters, not just here, but I see it in the Daily Egyptian sometimes, so don't shoot me, but where, we're relying on one source for a story, and that's really not good enough. You really have to make sure that what you're being told and what you're finding out is reliable and supportable, and so you always should have, even if you can't always reflect it in the tight space that you've got, you should yourself have 2 or 3 sources for everything. And we talk a lot about writing well up here, but writing well means that you can think well. It really reflects how you're able to understand something and put things together and reflect them back and explain them. So it's not just spelling the words right and knowing the difference between there, and there. It's really being able to think to the point about critical thinking. And that's what you really need to be willing to get corrected on and take correction and take advice and learn from the editors that you're going to run into.
I think on the mundane side, one thing that we don't see a lot of or as much of are good interviewing skills. So it'd be wonderful if the college and the different departments, and maybe they're doing it these days, help you develop those skills on how to handle yourself in an interview, because again, you're marketing yourself. And secondly, the challenge, and I'm only speaking to radio and television here, it frustrated the hell out of me that 5 years ago, my company was starting a news department in South Bend, Indiana, and we were hiring 45 people. And not one of the people hired was from Southern Illinois University. Actually, the vast majority, probably about 90% of the people hired were from the University of Missouri and Arizona State University. Now, why anyone who is from Arizona would want to spend a winter in South Bend, Indiana, I don't know. But that really, and, you know, I had a conversation, it really frustrated me. Because these were jobs on all levels of a news department available. And that's because there wasn't contact between this department and our, hiring managers. I have a very good friend who is a professor at Indiana University. I scolded him. I mean, 45 good jobs, and I don't think we even got an applicant from SIU. And I know, South Bend is not San Diego, but there's a lot happening up there, and that would have been a great opportunity for someone to start. So that is my constant challenge to the faculty, to make sure that they have contacts, maintain contacts in the industry that they can share with the graduating students.
What other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Emma Oliver. I'm a junior here, obviously, in the CP department, cinema specialization, not so much photography. And I wanted to start with thanking all of you for coming and talking with us. It's really inspirational, especially I'm graduating in next May to see successful Salukis out there. So thank you, that means a lot to me. And so I wanted to ask, sorry this is kind of dividing the panel in half, but as women, did you face any challenges in your respective industries?
Well, yes. I think, it's sort of funny because one of my first, when I first started off in journalism, I was in the police beat too. And in the police beat, it's a very macho culture, so you're, I felt some pressure to, to sort of fit in because it's a very, very, sort of like a club. As journalists often, actually, I found some similarities between the reporters and the policemen because you both feel sort of embattled, you're both like, the world doesn't like you, basically, So there was a little bit of, because I was trying to cultivate sources, it was, depending on the background that you come from, I came, I was working in the inner city, and I came from a very, white protected sort of suburb. So to me, it wasn't just the sex, it was also just the background I came from. That was a little bit difficult for me. And then actually, I think I felt it more maybe in the corporate world where, and again, I see some women might have fit into this, but there was definitely this, all the senior people on the board level were all, golfing. I mean, that's a stereotype, but that's what it was, and I didn't do that, and again, so I think there were some women who fit in with that, but I didn't. So I don't know if maybe it's not as much sex as it was the fact that I also didn't fit in because of I was in a very conservative industry, and I am really liberal, and that caused a lot of, if you haven't picked that up yet, I'm sure you have. And that's, the pharmaceutical industry is a very conservative industry, so I was always the gadfly, and it's really a challenge. So, but some of that was being female, and I think some of it was the personality types. I don't know, I hate to make generalizations personally, but a lot of women, the problem I had with the police initially was the fact that I wasn't taught to be, aggressive and in their face and, trying to
call you sweetie and hun and things
yeah,
like
you have to sort of overlook that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, or even just the kind of stuff they did in the corporate world to a lot of them were hard drinkers, and would a lot of the marketing folks, and you're expected to smoke cigars by the poolside, including the women if they're there, So it's more learning how to be your own person, being comfortable. But I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think being a woman is both has been both good and bad. So I, benefited from a lot of the energy that was being put into and initiatives that came about in the late 70s and 80s to get more women into businesses and and media was a big one where there was a real effort to try to bring more women into the media businesses. And so I benefited from that. So in many ways, I think that I was a token at first in some jobs, and that's okay. If you're going to be a token, just take advantage of it and do your best. I think it's also tougher, just as you say, because not so much anymore, but at the time, you know, you really were in the minority. And so anytime you're in a minority, for whatever reason, it's a little bit more difficult. And generally, it's a fairly male culture if you're covering the police beat or if you're covering the county government, or politics was, you know, some of the really most difficult for me. But, and I, you know, even within getting promoted within the newsrooms, and salary disparities existed. And unfortunately, this is still the case, but it's not as bad as it was. So I think that things are changing, and I think that we have the benefit of, you know, in the last 40 years of having culture that both from men and women recognizes the importance and the value of diversity. And whether we're talking gender or race or any kind of diversity, the more voices, the better we're able to reflect and reach society. But I just went to a panel last night on women in the media, women leadership in the media, so I've been thinking about this. And remembering that when I was a reporter, after about, I think, 5 years in Rochester, it was time for raises, and people got raises, and I asked, you know, 2 of the guys sitting near me what their raises were, and somehow found out. And I got a lower percent raise than they did. So at the time, you know, they had libraries with paper clippings in them, so I went to the morgue and I got my stack of paper clippings from the last 6 months, and I got Dan's and I got Bob's. And I went into the managing editor and I said, these are my stories, these are Dan's stories, these are Bob's stories. They got, you know, a 5% raise, I got a 3% raise. I don't understand why. And I didn't get fired. Probably partly because I was a token hire, but anyway. But you know, you have to speak up for yourself. I can't even remember. I think the whole, I don't remember, and I don't remember if I got more money. But I should remember. But I think that you do have to speak up for yourself. And the same thing happened to me when I went to USA Today. And USA Today was really in the forefront. Gannett was in the forefront of promoting women and putting women in leadership positions. And but I was promoted to a managing editor of a section on the same day that 2 guys were promoted to managing editors of their sections, sports, money, and the magazine. And they got paid $55,000 and I got paid $50,000. We were all the same age, we're all graduated the same year from college, we all had relatively the same experience. And again, I went to the managing editor and said, this doesn't seem fair to me. He rationalized it by saying that I was in charge of fewer people in the magazine than the others. They had more people reporting to them. So, you know, and that didn't change immediately until I happened to get a job offer at another publication for a lot more money, and then I got a lot more money because they.
But the difference is, what's good is you did confront, and I think that I read a study once that shows that, you know, part of the problem is with us ourselves. We don't do that. We're much less likely to challenge than men are.
But it's really hard.
It is very hard.
It's really hard, and it's a big risk because it might not, you know, turn out right.
There was when I was in the association world, I went to a workshop once. It was on something called the imposter syndrome. Have you heard of this?
Where you feel like,
people imposter syndrome is basically when maybe you're very successful, but you're thinking to yourself that somehow it's a fluke, and somebody will discover at some point that you're just a charade and you're just pretending, and then what, you know? And I looked around the room, and guess what? It was 95% women. So there is something there, you know. I don't know if it's because of the way we're socialized and the way it's taught, but it is really, really important to try to, it is very hard, and it is a risk, but to do it.
And that's why I would encourage all of you to go into, you know, as you move up through the ranks and you get the opportunity and you might become managers and in charge of, you know, hiring and things like that, that you really have the ability to, that's where you have the ability to make a change in how things are done. And that's the real responsibility that you have too as you're seeing those inequities and, you know, getting into positions where you can help fix them and help correct them for the future.
I don't think I have too much more to add. I would agree that it, in my experiences, it has been good and bad. Bad in many of the ways that you described, but I would add one more. I found that when I was a reporter and then later as a manager, if I were as aggressive as a man in putting forth my point of view or trying to get my way, or when I covered Congress for a number of years, which was a male-dominated place, if my questioning was always seen as too aggressive or too forceful, when I would be asking the same questions of people to me in ways that were indistinguishable from my male colleagues. But because you're a woman, it is somehow viewed as inappropriate. And so you always sort of have to be mindful of how, you know, how you come off, not that you're going to change it, but that you're going to be judged in a different way by especially when you're covering men. You know, it's the whole idea of, you know, if a man is very forceful and very aggressive, well, he's just tough. And if a woman is that way, well, she's a bitch. So that I found that to be true. But the flip side is when I wanted to move into management, when I wanted to take on more responsibility, I found that there were those opportunities, as Marcia said, because there were attempts to diversify staffs, or there are still attempts to diversify newsrooms and public relations organizations, particularly at the higher levels. And so if you are willing to take on more responsibility and let it be known that you're willing to take on more responsibility, you will find that those opportunities exist because they need more women in those positions.
We just have a few minutes remaining, so we want to leave things perhaps on a lighter note. So, from your time at SIU, do you have any stories that you'd like to share or nuggets of information that perhaps you gained from faculty or from your experiences that really stuck with you throughout your career and you still use to this day? Bob, I'll put you on the spot first.
A beloved professor, John Kurtz, had a saying that I love and keep in my head every day, which was, "Who promised fair?"
Another, oh, go ahead,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I love that one. Go ahead.
Another beloved professor, Cliff Lawhorn, taught news writing, and his saying that I remember was that when covering people who are in important positions, just remember that in the morning, they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you do. That's been very helpful to me when you get scared going into a big interview. They're just people.
I'm thinking.
Oh, well, I don't know. When I was, Bill Harmon was the managing faculty editor of the Daily Egyptian when I was here, and he would very carefully critique the newspaper every day, and he had this red ink pen. He would put it up there, and he'd put "ugh." That's his thing, "ugh," by anything. But what I really respected about him, though, he was a really, really tough critic. Yeah, so you remember him? Yeah, he's a very tough critic, but I really, he prepared me, you know, because the world of journalism is very hard. You are really hard deadlines, and you get You have to develop a thick skin because you'll get criticism from your editors and from your sources. If people don't like the story, don't like your headline, whatever. So that's what I remember, is that more so than the classwork, whatever, is really learning how to be a good writer and fast, and really how to take critique, hard critique, for really a gift. That it really is. It can be easy to get defensive and take it personally, but he taught me to see it for the gift that it really is.
I think the best advice I got was from a photo instructor who was just at SIU for a short time. But his greatest piece of advice was, look at your resume, and if you were the boss, would you hire you? And I'm like, And that has stuck with me ever since going forward. And it's just been a great way to kind of critique your own self by looking at your resume or looking at your book, looking at your reel, your demo reel going forward. And it's like, yes, you need to think about who you're applying to and kind of customize your resume, book, or reel to that specific client, because essentially that's what you're all doing. You'll be essentially trying to please and have a client hire you. So it was great advice, and it works to this day. So.
My turn. I think, actually, I guess it was probably in my copywriting class with Dr. Florence Reif, whom I don't know if anyone here remembers Dee Reif, but we had to write package copy for a cracker brand called Wheatsworth. And I'd never written copy before that class, and I never really had an appreciation for it. And it, not unlike, I think, Bill Harmon, it was that hard critique, that really forcing us to think differently about the words that we were putting on that page. Gave me a really deep appreciation for not only for observing, the content around me and kind of really analyzing it, but also I think I've carried from that time an appreciation for, because I had all of our strategy work and do a lot of brand positioning and strategy, and just how you articulate the value of something is very important, and the words that you choose to do that. And I did learn that here, and it was a very important lesson.
Jackie, any?
Well, I also was under the tutelage of Bill Harmon, and I couldn't agree with Pam's description more. He was a tough critic. Yes, he did teach us how to maintain a thick skin. He also taught us really what our roles and responsibilities were. I'll never forget the story I turned in, one of the first stories I had begged him for a job at the Daily Egyptian, and he finally gave me the job at the Daily Egyptian. And one of the first stories I turned in was a story about student enrollment, and I got a number wrong. And he came over, or I was called into his office and said, Kosyczuk, what is this? And I said, well, something along the lines of, it's only one number, the rest of the story is pretty good. And he was furious. He said, if you do this again, you will be gone. You will be out the door. And that was a very sobering moment where I realized that I was the custodian of accuracy and fairness and balance and all those things that they teach you at SIU. And my livelihood was on the line, and my future was on the line. So thank you, Bill Harmon.
Yeah.
With that, thank you to our esteemed alumni. Dr. Lemish, I want to give you the final word, but thank you all so much for giving up your afternoon to hear what these people had to say. Thank you.
Thank you again on behalf of everybody, to both Ramsay and Marcia Bullard and Tom Blim and Pam Bailey and Ryan Matsumoto, and of course our own Jennifer Fuller. I want to say a couple of more things. One, they are still hanging around here. If anybody wants to come and chat with anybody right after the panel, please. Oh, and of course, Jackie Kosyczuk, sorry. The informal panelists in the audience. They're hanging around, so if you want to chat with anybody personally after the meeting, please hang around here. They're going to be here tomorrow because they're here for the annual meeting, and a few other alums are also joining us tomorrow. In the DCR room between kind of 10:15 to noon, There'll be an open thing, drop by if you have some time, if you want to ask questions, if you want to mingle and talk. The other thing is that we just added to our website, to the college website, a new feature. I don't know if you ever check our website, but if you do, and I encourage you to come and check it, there is a link that is called Our People. And under Our People, you can find out information about your advisors if you haven't talked to them recently, about your faculty members, the staff, WSIU staff, the Dean's National Industry Council. You can see all the members and learn more about them. But we just added another link that is called Alumni. And there is a pool of our alumni that we're going to keep updating. And you can just get a glimpse of what other kind of professional careers have developed by people just like you who graduated and went on their own merry way. And there are people there who have been very established, but also alums that just graduated recently and are there, including some of the people that are here in the college. So I encourage you to just look around and see the kind of different paths that you can take in the future and what might happen in a few years. And as I can't remember who was it that said it, maybe Bob said it before. Hopefully, in some years, some of you will be sitting here and sharing with the next generation of students your experiences, what you have learned, and maybe you would say, one of the important things in my career was I attended a panel with alums. Thank you, everybody. Have a great end of the spring semester. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to Mark for recording it. Thank you for everybody who helped make it happen. Have a nice evening.